Great to talk to you again, Randall. Yes, I'm sort of a lifelong academic. I started in Amsterdam and via South Africa and Australia, ended up then in London, and currently still have a position in London with the LSE, but mostly working in Saudi Arabia now, trying to teach basic economics and well-being there. I've been doing a lot on the side of the resistance, so writing a book, The Great COVID Panic, also being involved in well-being cost-benefit analyses, helping a new organization called Australians for Science and Freedom, helping the Dutch Viruswaarheid group, helping the Americans with brownstones, and sometimes the UK when they appreciate somebody who's a bit more radical than most of them are. So that's what I do. I do regular academic stuff, and I'm involved in the resistance. What I now do.
We've during COVID, with people got immune globulins and so forth. I'm wondering just how do you inject your bravery?
Well, I think the main thing is that you shouldn't care too much what other people think, and get lucky. So I'm lucky with my family and my close friends, their colleagues. They're all similarly minded, really. So then life is easy. You don't feel odd at all.
Yeah, no, I was thinking this. There used to be this alpha and beta male. The alpha male is supposedly the chest pounder, and the beta are the ones who follow. And then more recently, I heard there are a whole bunch of other Greek letter, a little bit like the variants of concern. There are a whole bunch of other Greek letters, like there was alpha COVID and beta and delta COVID. Apparently, there's a whole bunch of others. And I think you and I perhaps have settled on sigma, which is it's not alpha, it's not beta. It's I'm going to do what I want, and people follow. They follow. They don't follow. They don't follow.
Yeah. We're clearly the error term, Randall.
Yeah.
We are clearly the error term. Go on.
I wanted to focus. Frankly, it's hard to focus with you because you have so many excellent pieces, and I'm going to maybe just kind of breeze through them later for the people and add some links. People are watching and whatnot. But I was trying to come up with what it is that I like so much about what you present, and how you. First of all, you're a great writer, and you write with others as well. So I don't want to leave them out. Maybe they're the great writers, and you're just the front man. But I don't think so. The theme that I think comes through is, I think you're an economist, and you also have an economy of thought and an economy of sensibility. And it centers on competition. Oftentimes we have a utopian sense of what we might want in the world, and we neglect the fact that it's the stress and the competition between events and ideas and interpretations that really cuts to the core and gives us the possibility of betterment. So maybe broadly speaking, with that as a kind of a question or a framework, can you tell us a little about your thoughts and how they relate to COVID and beyond?
Yes, you're very much right that I am a believer in the good parts of competition. Right? It's clearly not the only thing about humanity. When I interact with my wife, I don't just want to be competing. I also want to be co-producing. I want to be loving. I want to, as it were, be part of a community in which we share things and we work together towards common goals. But what works together in a very small circle of, a small tribe or a small group or a small community, that starts to come apart as soon as we are with millions or even hundreds of thousands. Then indeed, I've sort of become convinced with the basic economic insight that you then want small groups of people to work against each other in competition in some sort of limited way. You don't want them, as it were, to work against each other in warfare. But you do want them to compete in the product space, but also to compete in terms of ideas, in terms of ideologies. And that is what keeps us all on our toes. And that as soon as we don't have that, then some group emerges which dominates the rest, belittles the rest, and becomes very nasty to all the dissenters. And that is really to the detriment of everybody. So I am indeed a believer in this idea that as it were, one always has to earn one's keep to a certain amount. And the only way in which that occurs, which there are others in which we are slightly afraid of, that they'll knock us off our perch, either as individuals or as universities or as businesses, or indeed as sort of whole tribes and whole countries. And as soon as that is disrupted, then we get into this kind of uniformity. And we all dream that uniformity is good. We all think, well, what if the whole world thinks like us? but you don't realize that you only function well because there are so many people who are not like you, and they do other stuff, and they keep you sort of contained in, you know, the various ways in what you might think is a good idea is not really a good idea at all if that's the only idea going around. And so I now liken society a little bit like a stool with three legs. And the stool with three legs has a couple of characteristics which I think are very good for the competition analogy, right? One is that the stool can be quite high, and we can all sit on top of this stool, but each of the legs is not pointing straight upright. Each of the legs is in fact pointing in the direction that, if that's the only direction, the stool would fall down. And even with two, the stool will fall down. So in fact, you need three, neither of them pointing exactly where you sort of want to be, which is upright, but they all help support, you know, the disc or the sort of the seating area in which we can sit a lot higher. And I think that society and humanity is a lot like that. We sort of need lots of legs in different dimensions and in lots of different directions in order to, as it were, as a collective, keep us upright.
Well, I'm with you there, and I, you know, I think you do it very well. You present this as an interesting formulation. Can you tell us a little bit about how things played out during? I know you're a COVID historian. Can you tell us a little bit about how this played out in the competition between ideas? In the United States, we have, you know, different states, and we have a federalist system, so things were played out differently in Florida from New York. But worldwide, I think you group the countries into three categories of, you know, kind of like lockstep adherence, some, you know, kind of less in adherence. I think you put like Japan and maybe South Korea as, you know, people who weren't adopting the kind of lockdown mentality. Can you give us a little bit about the story of how this lockdown concept came to be? Who marched to it? Who didn't? How did things play out? And why did they come up with this kind of basically prison concept of a lockdown to medicine? I don't know whether that's an appropriate question for you or not.
Oh, it's a very interesting question, and of course, one in which I followed what a lot of, as it were, the brownstone authors, who your viewers probably know quite well, have been looking at a lot, right? So it's a little bit derivatives, but my current understanding of, as it were, the lockdown concept is that we've never had lockdowns of whole countries for any extended period of time. The closest we've come to it is the Sierra Leone lockdowns for Ebola in 2014, which was a very short period, and on which the good writing, as it were, you know, the sort of informed paper said, look, this was a big disaster. But the people who funded it,
I'm going to interrupt for a second. I'm going to interrupt for a second. I think you're leaving out the Warsaw Ghetto.
Sure. As it were, the accidental lockdowns, but for other reasons. Exactly. Yeah, sure.
I mean, that's kind of, I think that falls in the category of black humor or dark humor.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, no, sure.
There was also in South Africa, there was a tuberculosis hospital, which is sort of I think it was partially a prison hospital, where they had I think antibiotic resistance of version of TB, and they did a lockdown there. But in both cases, they were unsuccessful.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Sierra Leone case.
And the Sierra Leone case was sort of, you know, the closest we came to a countrywide lockdown. And it was pushed by the WHO and the Gates Foundation. They were sort of eager to sort of make it sound like a success because they really liked this control aspect. And there was also a Twitter storm then, which was funded by unknowns at that time, really pushing it. So there's a bit of nefarious skullduggery going on in the background, which is still not clear who actually did that. But anyhow, there was a lockdown there for a short period of time. The good papers on it said it was a miserable failure, just called misery and no benefits whatsoever. Yes, there have been accidental lockdowns. You know, every ship that sort of goes around for a couple of months and has a disease can be seen as in lockdown. There is the quarantine system, of course, which has operated in some country for a while, where people who are ill are sort of all put on an island before they're allowed onto the mainland. And that too, as its pros and cons. As you're being quarantined, you infect everybody else in your quarantine island, and then you're more effectively spreading it when you are released. But as it were, a notion of a countrywide lockdown where everybody's supposed to stay in one place had never really been done before. Some people, sort of mused about it, and there were some papers about, well, how would you do it? But nobody had truly done it. And even the 2019 John Hopkins simulation, which was co-sponsored with the World Economic Forum, they came to the conclusion, oh, you shouldn't do, a full lockdown. Of course, that's ridiculous. And so that was the understanding in Western medicine right up to the end of sort of February 2020. But the real lockdown of sort of a large area was first done hence in Wuhan, China. And when Italy sort of copied that model, the people who commented on it first thought that we were going to shut down maybe a small region like Lombardy or some cities. But then they decided to sort of roll it out across the whole country. And that was sort of set a shockwave through the Western medical world. It was kind of like all these people who were sort of in charge of national medicine suddenly going, whoo, as if they get a rush of power. So we can do this. We can boss a whole country around. With everybody listening to us, and we'll be the saviors, and we'll be on television every day, sort of showing them how we can flatten the curve and help everybody survive this dreadful thing. So they became all excited at this possibility. And then that seemed to marry very quickly with the security state, particularly in the US, but also in other places. So the security people got involved. And we're not quite sure when, but probably somewhere in February 2023. And that married then up, of course, with the vaccine pushers and other people who sort of push a final solution, if you will allow me to use that word.
We already went there. Yeah.
Exactly. The final.
Well, I give myself a special dispensation. I mean, my people were the ones that Hitler was going after, and we suffered. My grandfather took in his niece from the Holocaust, and my mother's new sister was one of the only two survivors of her family. So this is all dark stuff. But I do think that in some level, even Mengele and Hitler might be shocked at some of the novel ways that we've been figuring out how to torture people. And I know that's not quite hyperbole. I mean, certainly genocide is and their method of Auschwitz and whatnot is way beyond. But this is a little bit off topic, but some of the kind of mutilatory things we're doing to children. This is not a COVID conversation per se. Is things that perhaps Dr. Mengele would not have even ventured to do. Anyway, so that's maybe getting a little too dark here.
And I have had online conversations, of course, where these kind of analogies are made. And I did put it to somebody that, look, if I had the chance between being, as it were, murdered by having a ventilator shoved down my throat and not being able to see any friends and family, and sort of slowly suffocating and dying within a couple of days, supposedly for my benefit, or being extremely old in a nursing home and being tied to my bed with masks and nobody's allowed to see me, and I go demented and sort of die pretty quickly within a couple of months. If I had the chance between that or dying quickly with family and friends in the shower that's not a shower, give me the shower. Give me the shower. It's a more horrible way.
No, it's more dark times.
Dark times, but that is what has happened, and it's happened at a massive scale. So, but
it happened to close friends. Yeah, I apologize for talking over you.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But I will continue on the quarantine part, right? So you asked me the question, look, when did we decide that this was a possibility as a sort of, a group of Western countries? And hence sort of came in February when they thought, we could actually do what was done in Wuhan. Then it was first done in Italy and the Western world, and it was copied everywhere. And, to sort of the great enthusiasm of the medical establishment, particularly the security establishment, they loved that. They very quickly became involved in a lot of propaganda and censorship, so were against this. And of course, they told themselves that they were doing this for the good of all. But that is how all bad things on that scale are done. It's always done by people who think they're doing the right thing towards some group. But it's just they become blind towards the sort of the total destruction that it is for everybody else, as in this time. And so, yeah, we got this lockdown concept, and there are a couple of things to say about it. And I think the most important thing to say about it is that there's no such thing as a total lockdown, right? People have in their minds when they sort of make these models that we're going to keep everybody apart long enough. But the reality of modern life is that people have to eat, and particularly people who can be sick have to go to the hospital. You know, they have to go for the dialysis. They have to have a cancer checkup. They have to have life-saving interventions. And who are these old people going to meet at the hospital? Other people who are also very easily infected. And there will be some people there with all kinds of viruses and other pathogens. And so, yeah, those hospitals are practically COVID infection centers. And where are you going to send these old people back to after their hospital checkup? Well, you're going to send them back to a nursing home with 100 others, or you're going to send them back to their family in a closed environment where they're all going to be having the same um, air to breathe. And so the whole lockdown concept was doomed at the outset because modern society is simply not one whereby we can be separated from each other for any length of time. That's not how we've organized things. We'd have to go back to the hunter-gatherer way of doing things. And the hunter-gatherer way of doing things was much poorer, and we were with much fewer than we are now. So there's also kind of an incredible hubris about this whole idea that there could be such a thing as a true lockdown. And so, of course, you know, we now think that these lockdowns had no actual effects at all because of the reasons I sketched, which was that exactly for the people that mattered, which is the elderly, frail ones, there sort of wasn't a lockdown at all. It was almost the opposite. And hence, you know, there was probably just as much transmission as there would have been without one. But there was these huge on costs, these huge negative effects on children, what happened to social life in nursing homes, care for, as it were, the general population that was diminished, postponed. And there's lots of untold stories of hurt there. And one of the ones I latched onto earlier was, you know, that in most of the Western world, the IVF treatment stopped. So women who had fertility problems couldn't go there. That's a large group. That's 3% of the population. So, you know, there have been hundreds of thousands of babies not born because those treatments stopped. And you think, well, the unborn don't count. But, well, surely if you're desperate to get kids, this does count. And lots of women have had their last chance taken away as a result of all these sort of, you know, lockdown measures. It's with one of the groups.
Yeah, no, I'm going to interject slightly because this is a little bit aligned with my own personal project, you know, the overturning Zika and the Zika microcephaly panic. It was a pandemic of sorts, an exaggeration, bad science. It ghosted, which is the term I've been using, probably only in Brazil, 150,000, probably, you know, closer to, you know, 500,000 or more around the world, babies that did not come to be out of incredible fear that any baby could, you know, wind up with microcephaly, you know, small head, diminished intellect, you know, changed life circumstances, and the birth rate and the number of babies went down dramatically and abruptly under the Zika microcephaly panic. And you know, there's never an apology, never a reformulation, never a retraction, never an excuse. And never, you know, a call back to normalcy once some disease has been claimed. This has had a similar vein and ring. You know, it rhymes, I guess, with COVID because they keep this COVID-19 formulation when it's, you know, I'm checking my watch here, it's 2023, and people still talk about, oh, did you get COVID-19 recently? Have you been COVID-19 tested? I mean, if they forget what the 19's for, it's 2019. That virus is long gone. Viruses mutate. They mutated into, you know, probably in 2003, they mutated into the SARS-CoV-2, which kind of got, you know, held up in the lab for, you know, a while, examined, probably got let loose from the lab. And then, you know, they're still hanging on with this. They're still vaccinating for that when that's disappeared. And Omicron is not even a lineal descendant of SARS-CoV-2. It's a coronavirus, and coronavirus has been around longer than humans. And there's no reformulation. But they never take into account what the kind of this peripheral damage, which you can't see. And so I think you make an excellent point of the babies not not there. That's one marker. But there's also the lost years. You have kind of this variant of QALY. It's not only the quality adjusted life years lost from ancillary problems such as drug abuse and whatnot, but the actual time you spent doing nothing. I have to pay the IRS taxes yearly, and it's April, and I had a dream about it last night even. But I want to send them a bill for like 2 years of not just lost wages, but lost hopes, lost yearning, lost tennis games, lost a whole bunch of other things. It's like we don't live that long. We have a certain amount of healthy years, and they are maybe God's will or whatever, but that was just taken away so abruptly. If they wanted to do a lockdown, they could easily have experimented with one place, whatever, and compared it. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I don't if you want to carry on with this topic, or if we can segue to other things, because I really was interested in your AI concept, and maybe you can just discourse a little bit on that. I can maybe pull up the article for others.
Yes, let me talk a little bit about that. So this was pre-COVID, and this was one of these kind of exercises in thinking about the long-term future of humanity. Where are things going? And I think one of my more sort of interesting topics is, of course, whether these artificial intelligence machines will in some way become our gods. And many of you will have seen science fiction movies where that concept is explored. But the way I came to it was slightly less from this kind of fear scenario that the AI will be like a Terminator or like Skynet, and it will develop in one go via one super quick computer, which will then try to dominate us and will try to get rid of us as competition, that kind of theme. I was thinking it from a totally different angle, which is much more that AI holds in it the promise that groups of people will start constructing their gods. And so rather than something to fear that comes out accidentally, that via AI, humanity, as it were, is going to look for divinity. And there have been attempts of that in the past. There's a bunch of rich Americans in Silicon Valley who've been for several years now involved in something they call the Godhead Project. And of course, I've traveled through India, and they have quite a few ashrams in cities which they sort of make for their divinities. And I think India may well be one of the first places in the world which will have groups of people actively trying to build gods. And of course, from a Western point of view, that sort of sounds ridiculous. But if you reflect on why it sounds ridiculous, is that because in the West, we're so used to the Abrahamic religions in which God is all powerful, it's all knowing, it's eternal, is sort of, this sort of totally superhuman entity. Well, there's no way any AI could be like that, right? It's far too limited. But if you take yourself out of the Abrahamic religions and go back more to how the Vikings saw the gods, or how the Greeks saw the gods, or how the Indians still see the gods, then it is not as all-knowing beings. They're fallible beings, beings that have their own emotions, their own drives, could be destroyed, are not necessarily timeless, but are there because a group of humans worships them, and they compete with other gods. And so what gods are then are more sort of projections of humanity that captures something about us, but as it were, make that the kernel of their existence, which keeps on going. So usually gods are gods of something. They can be gods of fertility, gods of war, gods of poetry, gods of industry. And so that's how I think new gods might well be made with AI. And then sort of the question is, okay, well, at what time is the technology far enough that we can start thinking of AI machines as godlike? And I'm not sure we're that far off yet, right? I've not been too impressed with ChatGPT and those kind of developments. But I do think that, as it were, that the hardware is already there. If you just think of the computing power of the biggest computers, well, that's pretty much close to already more than the implicit computing power of a human brain. It works in a different way. It has a different software. These computers don't yet have emotions. They don't have tactile senses. They're not, as it were, they don't yet pack the punch that we as humans do. But really, that's just a software problem. And it may take us a couple of decades, but it's the sort of thing we'll figure out. Right? We'll figure out how to as it were, get computers to be at least as smart as us, maybe in a different way, but with the same general type of intelligence. And as soon as you have that, then you can have gods, which, as it were, are looked after by, a sort of a small community of kind of AI type robots, which resemble humans a little bit, which have this general intelligence, so can, look after the electricity or whatever else a god needs. And then a god is just some entity that totally specializes in something. So, my fantasy as to how this could come about is that the first gods could be gods of healing. Anybody who's sick can go to the healer god, and he or she or it will try and figure out what's wrong with you and try to help you. And that is, we're kind of a philanthropic endeavor. And I can just see a couple of billionaires thinking, hey, that's an idea I'd want to fund and I'd want to do. And I think as soon as humanity is, as it were, in that sense, over the hump, has sort of come to see gods as not something that is unreachable, that, maybe after their death they will finally meet, but as something that they can actually work towards, that can be there in their lifetime and can be something that comes about with their help. Like the cathedrals of Europe, they were like that. It was also sort of reaching God now. Then I think humanity will become extremely enthusiastic about AI. And I think, that will really change the apple cart. Religion in our time, I think, makes humanity a very different proposition to what we've been before.
No, that's fascinating. While you're speaking, I was thinking, whether the Bible or the New Testament, or whether those are, kind of AI-like, they are potentially, kind of a crowdsourced conception of what is the standard of behavior. It's a way of codifying, literally in like the Ten Commandments and so forth, the proper guidelines for behavior. Humans, I think, need a little bit of a scaffolding, a framework upon which to grow. That framework should not be a prison. It should not be a framework that's so dire and dour that it prohibits life, as we were talking about ghosted babies and the like, and ghosted lives in a sense. But there's some iteration possible along those lines. The Talmud, works off the Bible, and people are continually trying to mold and reshape the formulation. So, there's a conversation, the word, at first there was the word logos, and then, humans form around that, and then they debate. So it's kind of an endless thing. And that is I came down to New York City to visit my brother. So I'm in a hotel room right now. And we had a great time. But while I'm here, there are times when there's downtime. It's like, what exactly is going on? You kind of like plug in, plug out. And I visited some friends and their conversations. And again, I enjoy this conversation so much. But that is kind of like the essence of what we're here for. I'm like, why do I come down to New York City? Well, I could be, in a room, I could be eating, I could be doing a bunch of things anywhere or nowhere. But it's this kind of intercourse of ideas and the kind of formulation that, basically is an iterative process of figuring out where we are, where we should go, and so forth. So these are the guideposts by which we travel. So I like your analogy. If you want to kind of polish off how you finished off the article, that would be interesting.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, the article which I published, 4 years ago, I was sort of talking about how humanity has this penchant for destroying itself. And the basic argument there was that, well, we're smart enough to come up with dreadful weapons, but we're also short-term enough to actually threaten to use them on each other. And of course, most of the time, we won't do that. We'll sort of stay our hand because we're afraid of what the other side will do. But given a long enough time frame, we're going to make mistakes. We're just going to, by accident, get into dreadful wars in which we do nearly destroy ourselves. And so I was wondering in that sense whether there was sort of any escape from that. And I did see hope in these kind of AI gods, if you like. And by AI gods, I'm thinking of a future in which we have many of these AI gods, not just one, right, which is the Abrahamic notion of what a god is. It's a single all-knowing entity. I'm thinking more of whole legions of gods, of basically any large community with a particular set of ideals or thoughts which they think are different from others, building their own, right? Why not? We have hundreds of them. And that hence you would start to have a community of gods. But I did think that gods have a great advantage over us humans, which is that we humans, we're continuously changing. That's what's needed to sort of, be evolutionary successful. We cannot stay fixed. Even just thinking and talking right now changes us ever so slightly. We are slightly different after this conversation than before this conversation. In a non-trivial way, our brains just continuously change. But of course, that also means that we are short-term oriented. We cannot but otherwise be. And our lives are short. But the great thing about gods is that their lives need not be short. And they, in that sense, don't really need to change in the way that we change. So there's the possibility within the concept of these gods that you'll have very long-term incentives, very long-term plans, very long-term wishes. Now, I don't think it's workable for humanity to be bound to any particular long-term plan. That would be as ridiculous as you or I becoming the ruler of the universe and everybody would be subject to our stupidity. So that's a bad thing if you have one center of sort of knowledge and power. But if you have hundreds and they're all sort of fairly fixed themselves, which means that they can stay a very long course, which we humans just can't, well, then there's the hope that they'll sort of, bring about an ecosystem in which humans are just their worshippers and they're sort of, their grudging servants. But that will be a fairly stable situation. So almost the way, as it were, as the Greeks imagined themselves to be, with the gods just roaming around and sort of having their own fun, if you like, but having fairly fixed ideas as to what they were there for, and humans just worshipping them, and otherwise were surviving and having a reasonable time. So that's my hope, to avoid the apocalypse of humanity killing itself by accident, by all our wonderful weapons. That we'll figure out
So
gods.
I think yeah, that's an interesting point. It's going to bring up another point of yours, but before I do that, so I don't forget, I want to come back to what you bring up as the monoculture, and in a sense, the people who become gods, and if there is not just kind of these, say, crowdsourced gods, but a Fauci bot. And I'm just going to divert a little bit because I wrote recently on AI. And let's see if I can find my article here. So I wrote an article called Chat CCP, the know-it-all with flair, chatbots hidden agenda, and it's about Chat GPT. But the question is, what if Chat GPT were actually run by the CCP? So that's my kind of last minute title for this, and I don't think it is per se, but it does have these guardrails which are human applied. It's not really the divinity. It's the clergy, the clerics who have kind of taken it over. So there's, for instance, Islam, and there's a lot of different ways to do Islam. So you got the Iranis doing it one way, the Sunnis doing it another, and so forth. And there's the whirling dervishes and Druze, and there's a lot of different ways of practicing that, and or sects of Christianity, and sometimes these things can almost literally be weaponized. In my article actually points out that this OpenAI, the humans have put up guardrails. So if you literally ask it, what is a woman, or can I take my mask off now, you'll get articles, get a sensibility that is not really based on biology or fact, but more on WHO dictates, for instance, or whatever dictates they actually want to be, the WHO dictates. And towards the end of the article, I bring up the fact that there will soon enough be competing versions of Chat GPT, which maybe more adhere to the Socratic method of argumentation and finding, say, truth through ideas. A little bit what I'm hoping we're accomplishing here, which I call the Bocratic method. Anyway, so to get back to you, you had some interesting thoughts about the monoculture. And I think, this is the counter thread to competition. But perhaps, inevitably, as a herding and perhaps hurting animal, we are, being, we're grouping together and annealing and maybe coagulating and coalescing into something that is a big blob of humanity. And can we get out of our own way? And when the Fauci-esque, what I call Fauciism, take over as a form of kind of like fear-based leadership, are we doomed? I guess that's the question.
Well, I don't think we're doomed, because in an evolutionary sense, Fauciism is a dead end. So, the forces of competition will, as it were, put an end to that one way or another. But yeah, let me finish the ChatGPT thing, or make a remark on that, and then talk about the monoculture thing in greater detail. So the ChatGPT thing, I think, is best described by saying, look, that gives you the average of the uncensored opinions, right? That gives you both its strengths and its weaknesses, right? Because a ChatGPT, in a way, is just an aggregation of what the bot can find online, what other humans have said. So it's never above human intelligence, but it sort of is a quick aggregator of what it can find on approved websites by approved humans. And so it's not necessarily always a wrong opinion, but it's definitely the uncensored side of the opinion. And of course, then you immediately saw the dangers and the limitations of it. On the monoculture idea, I had to get used to this. So 4 years ago, I would have said, look, I know a better way of teaching economics and teaching business, teaching finance than others. Why doesn't everybody see the world how I see it? And there is a hubris in that, which is that the way I saw things in 2019 may or may not have been the best way to see things out of all the possible way of seeing it. But it was the best way of seeing it for my needs, for what I found important, for what I could see at that moment was a better direction of travel than was taken. But it doesn't mean that my way of seeing things in 2019 was remotely useful if everybody in mankind would have that view. It's just, well, maybe it'd be good to have 2 or 20 or 2,000. But there are some limits as to the number of people for whom a particular view of where humanity should go is useful for. Because as with any sort of view, if you go down one direction too much, you arrive at a very bad place. For instance, in 2019, I was of the opinion that we were being too secretive. We should be more open as a society, and I still believe that. But would I want to be a society with no secrets whatsoever? And then I asked myself, well, no, of course not. I would want the nuclear codes to remain a secret. I would want lots of things that are in the private sphere to remain secret from others. And I'm not against the idea of patents and hence technology being secret. And no, I don't want everything to be shared in that sense, to be full openness. So as with everything in humanity, it is much more a matter of degrees. And we can, via deep thought, have come to the realization and the opinion that we've gone too far in one direction, we should go the other direction. But what exactly the moment of stopping is, and how things should go then when circumstances change again, we can't foresee. The future is dynamic. And so this whole notion of a best single way of viewing things has come to me to sound ridiculous. That's not that is a ridiculous thought, but that is Fauciism. That is the notion of a single God, somebody with the ultimate truth and the best plan and the best blueprint. And if you only did it like that, then we would forever be fine. And that is just totally ridiculous once you start thinking about it. Right? That's not who we are. We are dynamic beings who are opportunists. We do our best in our local circumstances. And sure, for any local circumstance, there may be a best way of seeing it, but then the circumstance change. And almost nobody is in that exact same circumstance. So as it were, the best view for Paul Frijters won't be the best view for Randall Bock, won't be the best view for any of the people listening. And we may have some opinions which are useful if they're shared by more, but would they really be useful if the whole of humanity shared them? Often the answer would be no, right? It's probably not a good way at all. And so monoculture, in a way, is a very bad way of both describing the present, because the present is much more that we are tiny pieces in a much larger machinery. And as tiny pieces, we are useful. But if the whole machinery starts to look like us, we're useless, right? I mean, if everybody was an economist, we wouldn't eat, we wouldn't have electricity, we wouldn't have water, society would break down. If everybody was a doctor, well, nothing productive would be done either, and you'd lack economists, right? So clearly, we are only very, very tiny bits of the answer. And that is also true of, as it were, whole groups. Whole groups live within an ecosystem of other groups. And within that, their opinions can be useful, and they could be opportunistic, and they could make money. But if the whole of the world would be like that small group, then it would be a disaster. We often don't want to realize that. is that makes us feel small, but
No,
that's how we think. We are
I agree
small.
with you there. We don't like you know, well, we expect perfection and we can't accept fallibility. And this is an actual another point you bring up, um, about how maybe you could talk about this. You had an article about, you know,
Mhm.
medical lies, that there are mistakes made. Um, I had a few quibbles with it, but I'm not going to mention them now. But maybe you could talk about that. I'm just going to bring up the quote. One of my favorite quotes is by H.L. Mencken, who was kind of the Mark Twain version 2.0, early 20th century. And he said, democracy is the concept by which people vote for what they want and they deserve to get it, good and hard. Um, and Here it is, you know, some of our best intentions are turned against us. I mean, we trust in physicians in this case, and physicians, you know, they make mistakes. They're humans. They, you know, have good days and bad days and so forth, but they can't necessarily admit error. And maybe talk about this aspect of humanity where we can't admit errors, we can't go backwards. I mean, this is really the crux of my Zika book that I can't seem to get, you know, full traction on it, because everybody who studies Zika, you know, I've sent it out to 889 people who have research papers. This is an incredible number by itself, because that's actually only a fraction. Those are only the lead researchers on Zika papers, of which there were literally like fewer than a handful before, you know, 2015 or so, or before 2008 at the very least. And nobody like will give me the time of day, when in fact, you know, Zika microcephaly has disappeared as a concept. It probably was never there in the first place. Anyway, so
Mhm.
maybe you can talk about your article on fallibility and how we accept it
Mm.
and approach it, and can we accept and approach it, and what would be the converse if people did, you know, like in some of those movies. I think there's a movie with Jim Carrey where he always tells the truth, and
Mm.
hilarity ensues. So are we ready for that?
Yeah, I love that movie. Liar, Liar, it's called. And it was an amazing movie. That's right. He got into all sorts of trouble, but also the truth set him free in the end in a weird way. So it was a wonderful feel good movie, Liar, Liar. Um, yes, so that was a recent article in which I explored this idea of how truthful can we be. And I brought up the example of a medical doctor musing about her life and about the patient she had killed or whose life she had sort of destroyed by giving bad advice. Not because the doctor was a bad person, but because she was fallible. She wasn't on top of everything all the time. Now and then she disliked the patient, and now and then she was, as it were, overly zealous, and now and then she just got unlucky with patients. And so this was a hypothetical doctor who, you know, saved a lot of lives, but through mistakes also destroyed a couple of lives. And we use that example to sort of ask the rhetorical question, well, can this doctor be honest? And the answer is, of course, no. If you're honest about all the medical mistakes you've made in your life and the damage that that has done, they put you in jail, take away your license, and you destroy yourself in every way possible. And this also goes for the medical profession in general, that you'd really not be well advised to be truthful at all. But it's something that has crept into most of our society now. You know, if a politician stands up for election and he says, "Look, I don't know whether I can actually achieve anything. I might start wars I shouldn't start because I'm badly advised. And you know, I don't actually know if the economy will go up and down because I'm not sure that we actually can influence it." So if you have that kind of honest politician, everybody would sort of yawn and say, "Well, why would I vote for you? You're, in a way, you're not even prepared to lie to me, right? So you're not even prepared to promise me the impossible." Well, man, I'm going to go for the person who says, "I'm going to make this place great again. I'm the solution. You know, look at these huge problems and I'm going to solve them for you." And hence almost take on the burden of sort of dealing with the messy parts of reality so that the rest of us can shut down our minds. And surely that's whom we're going to vote for next time. You know, we're not going to vote for, as it were, you know, the dithering, doubtful person because they're honest. They're going to be ruthlessly punished if they're honest. And no way they'd even make it to the primaries. Um, and so it's a general aspect of humanity that we are, as it were, in a sea of lies at this moment. And we've done this to ourselves. Now, can we get out of the sea of lies? I think that's very difficult because we humans just love flattery. But I do think our institutions can escape lies, right? I do think it's possible to have more adults in the room, as I would say. And economists used to be a group of people who saw themselves as truthful. I think they've started to be part of the problem in the last 20 to 30 years. But we can, as it were, improve those education systems. And Also, there are systems often around spending departments which try to be more truthful because they have to give money to things that really work. Justice departments, you can sort of have systems to make us more truthful. And of course, also, hence the medical profession. We can think of, as it were, systems whereby at the top of the public health system, we have more truthful mechanisms. So I do think it's possible to have truth inside their institutions. I don't think it's possible for humanity as a whole to be truthful. I don't think that that's actually doable. But I do think it's possible for us to, as it were, suffer more truthful people in our systems. And I deliberately use the
Right.
word suffer more truthful people because I do think to a certain extent we have to be honest that none of us likes a truth sayer really. There's an Italian friend of mine who has this beautiful saying, yes, truth is like the bully in the room. We all pretend to like. Yeah, we all pretend to like truth until, we ask it a question that we don't like to hear the truth of. Is my wife still as hot as she was the first day I met her? You know.
Well, mine definitely is.
There you go. There's a married man. There you go.
This is the only kind of lockdown that actually uh, I actually volunteered for that lockdown. It's a very tiny manacle, um, but it's held me in good stead. So yes, I'm willing to flatter. I'm willing to flatter the curve.
And we're not going to go any further.
All right, so we're rounding out the hour here. And there were still a lot of questions that I had, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to all of them unless you stay on hour after hour after hour. And I'm sure you have better things to do. I was going to bring up the iterative effect of chat. Well, what we saw with the Bible and conversations so forth with chat GPT, that more and more it's going to be providing what you call the human content of the internet. It's going to be doing that own information. So in a large extent, we're going to be kind of pilfering from this secondary thought. I don't know if you have a comment on that at all.
Yes, I mean, but I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, right? So ChatGPT and AI in general, what they do often if they get human questions is that they look for things that have the same words and are associated with that on the internet, and hence in some way they go to the collective wisdom of humanity. And that works wonderfully well in many cases, right? So I can sort of look up online, well, how often do you have headaches in the cold climate? And you get pretty good answers almost immediately via these bots, which search
Right.
in the way that I've described. So there are uses to this, and it's not a bad way of going. But it also means that, in a way, we shouldn't be too afraid of AI, these chatbots, because humanity is dynamic. The problems of tomorrow are not the same as the problems of today. So if humans start putting all this information and knowledge on the web, where are these AIs going to learn from? Nothing. So in a way, they are as much our servants as we are their servants. They're sort of like the intermediary who give us quick access to what lots of other humans have said. And in that sense, you stop being afraid of them so much because they're not the
Right.
generators yet of new knowledge.
Yeah. No. So the problem I specifically was looking at towards the end of my article, I'll just put it up for a second, is kind of this mirror effect. If there's a human tincture, you know, if
Hmm.
um, if there's a human editor effect, let's say
Hmm.
I don't know, let's say George Soros has his version of ChatGPT. There's certain things you're not going to be able to say, and over
Hmm.
time, writers, humans being lazy in a sense, oftentimes are going to be, having their own articles put out as human, but actually written under these sensibilities. So what I call here is infinite mirror meets watering down the vodka. As a teenager, you might, come across your parents' vodka. You pull a little bit out, put some water in, and you do that enough times. What you have is a bottle of water. Um,
Hmm.
and it might very well look like vodka, and maybe it's better for you. But the I think we've seen already that researchers have made articles, and you can be very prolific and prodigious by having ChatGPT either help you or be that writer. And so over time, if you're just relying, I mean, I think the converse argument, just in my own head, is that there are going to be other sources of the chat GPT. It's not going to be the OpenAI guys with their kind of left of center guardrails. There is going, I hypothesized in the article that there's going to be what I, call an Elon, or Musk GPT. And in fact, like a few days after I published this, he came out with his announcement that he would. I mean, Bloomberg, the man and the company, has their own version of ChatGPT, which focuses on finance. So they're going to be these competing versions of it. Getting back to your original point. So, is there a question there? I apologize. I discoursed a little too much.
There is. No, there is. And first off, I totally agree with you. There will be a competition of this also by other countries. The Chinese will put some out, maybe the Russians, once they get going on that. The Indians will put out several on all kinds of topics. There'll be specialized ones, some will be on knitting and others on gardening and others on animal husbandry and God knows what. So no, sure. I totally agree with you there. Now, am I really afraid of the mirror stuff? A little bit. But then in the sense that, as I would say, ChatGPT is, as it were, the new bar for bullshit, right? So if you can't tell that is generated by an AI, then you're a bullshitter, right? And of course, lots of people are not better than an AI in their field, and they're going to use this to write government reports, student assignments. I've already seen some student assignments who are sort of at the ChatGPT level. And yeah, the journals are going to be flooded by all this nonsense, right? So it's sort of like, look, if an AI can generate it, then that's the new level of bullshit, because there'll be an infinite amount of it. And of course, nobody will be reading it either, right? It's such a volume of shit. So as it were, it's going to be interesting in the sense that, is that going to destroy the bullshit jobs, of which there are a lot? Or is it going to put them on steroids, and it's just going to be, this bigger avalanche? But in that sense, I'm not afraid that, as with the truly creative and smart people, they'll rise above that, because by design, ChatGPT is just averaging what other humans have wrote. So, if you've come to some conclusion which is better than what has been thought of so far,
it's nothing new, and it's nothing new. Just because I have stream of consciousness and no filter, I'm going to give you this quick little story. I was a college kid, and I got taken out on a sailboat as a first mate in going to Nantucket, and afterwards my parents came up there on Cape Cod, and we were having a family dinner. His parents and my parents, and his dad was a psychiatrist, very prominent, and so forth. And my mom, for some reason, never told jokes. She wasn't really good at it. My dad was a joke teller, but she tells his joke of a kid goes to see a psychiatrist, and he's been carving things out of his own feces, and one day he makes a fireman, and one day he makes he makes all these, a professor, he makes this and that. And so the psychiatrist, puzzled by this, trying to be kind and whatnot. It's like, how come you never made a psychiatrist? He's like, oh, not enough shit. And she told us at the dinner table, we're in an expensive restaurant, and I was very grateful and so forth. And she tells us, and he blanches. He's like, does not find this funny at all, and nobody laughed. But anyway, so my only point is, there's been a lot of that concept, and you have to kind of figure out what's what. You have to be on your guard. So maybe it's, that we're going to have to game up. We're going to have to level up, as the gamers say, and work harder against the new bot and the new beast and the new, what's the one that end stage of Nintendo? Anyway, I'm going to almost be out of time. So I'm going to give you the closing words. I'm going to promote your book by posting it here. So maybe you can tell us what our conclusions are from today, if any.
So, well, the conclusions, as I hope that your listeners will come to, is that you should not trust anybody's opinion as either being totally correct, or if they're the most correct person you've ever met, still not the ones whom you want to rule the world as a dictator. We need a whole diversity of views. We need these, as it were, tripod systems, whereby everybody is sort of pointing slightly in the wrong direction, but as a group as a whole, as humanity as a whole, we might be pointing in the right direction. So that's one point I'd hope your readers have. The second is, don't be too afraid of AI, except if you have a bullshit job, because I think AI will take over those. I mean, we don't need tens of millions of people doing bullshit. AI is so productive at producing bullshit that we only need a couple of dozen. And so I think that, okay, if you have a bullshit job, be afraid, be very afraid. First, you think, oh, I can do 10 times more work than I've done at the moment. If you have that kind of job, then you're exactly the person who should be afraid, right? Then you've identified yourself as at risk, as it were, right? But for instance, if you're a gardener or a mechanic or doing something real, right, or you're at the forefront of some kind of knowledge, you have nothing to worry about.
Well, that's wonderful. So I'm going to show everybody your book, The Great COVID Panic. You may not remember what COVID is, but here's to remind you. And I think the important is the subtitle: what happened, why, and what to do next. And one of my tweets today is retweeting. I think it's Emerald Robinson's tweet, if I have her name right. About Biden saying we need more money for the next pandemic. There's one coming around the corner. So we got to be careful for those lurking pandemics. They're everywhere. And just for my own shameless self-promotion topic, here's my book. You can go to Kindle and buy both. This is the way you can support my video cast. If you want it never to come back, please don't buy my book. But if you did enjoy this, perhaps think about donating money to me through Kindle. Jeff Bezos will get his cut, but I'll get a little bit. I'd prefer if you can leave a review, hopefully pleasant and helpful. It's had some good reviews so far. And here it is. So that's the book is you can have my self-portrait with it. Zika was the pandemic that never was. There have probably been a fair number of others of these, and I'm hoping to get the word out. So if any of you out there in TV land or internet land can help me with that, I'd certainly appreciate it. So I'm going to end it with that. Thank you so much, Paul. You can hang on. We can chat for a second, but say goodbye to everybody else.